In the autumn of 1969, I was 24 years old and working as a production assistant at Warner Brothers, mostly out of Studio 16. By that point, I had already put in 3 years in the industry, which was long enough to stop being naive about how things worked, but not long enough to stop caring about them. I grew up in Burbank. My father was a stagehand who spent his career on the old RKO lot, which meant I understood the machinery of Hollywood before I understood much else. I knew from an early age the gap between what the camera captured and what was actually true. That gap, I would come to understand, mattered more than most people ever stopped to think about, which is why I knew exactly what I was watching on that Thursday evening in October, or possibly Wednesday. I have turned that detail over in my mind for decades without settling it. But October, I am certain of. The Santa Ana winds were pushing in from the desert, and the air carried that particular quality those winds bring with them, dry and charged, as though the atmosphere itself were waiting for something to happen. I had met Bruce Lee for the first time earlier that same year, in the spring. He was on the studio lot doing preparation work for a project, listed officially as a consultant for fight choreography. What that title did not capture was the other thing he was doing, which was trying, with everything he had, to get people in that building to take him seriously. That was the unvarnished reality of where Bruce stood in 1969. Enter the Dragon was still years away from existing. The Green Hornet had already come and gone and left him with the role of Kato, the sidekick, the capable supporting presence who existed to stand one step behind a white lead. Useful, reliable, never the center of the story, never the reason anyone bought a ticket. I remember the first time I watched him walk onto the lot. He was small. I think that genuinely surprised almost everyone who encountered him in person, because the energy he gave off, the sheer force of his presence at a distance, made you expect something physically imposing. But he was perhaps 5'7", lean, nothing that would make you look twice if you passed him on a street without context. And then he turned around and looked at you directly, and every assumption you had formed in the previous 10 seconds quietly dissolved. The size stopped meaning anything the moment his eyes met yours. I spent a long time afterward trying to find the right words for what made his eyes different from other people's eyes, and never quite got there. The closest I could come was this. Most people's eyes move. Even exceptional people, even genuinely powerful people, their eyes are always in some kind of motion, calculating, weighing, performing. Bruce's eyes were still, completely and unusually still, like the fixed center point inside something rotating at high speed. We spoke for the first time outside Stage 9. I was carrying a stack of script revisions, and he was waiting for someone who was already 20 minutes late, which in Hollywood is generally a reliable sign that the meeting is not going to happen. Out of habit, more than anything deliberate, I offered him coffee from my thermos. He accepted without any fuss. We stood there in the California morning and talked about nothing that mattered for about 15 minutes. His daughter Shannon had just been born. He was tired in the particular way that new fathers are tired, that specific kind of exhaustion that somehow carries something luminous inside it at the same time. In the months that followed, I found reasons to be wherever Bruce was working. This was not unusual behavior. Half the young men on that lot did the same thing. When he demonstrated his techniques for the fight coordinators, people moved toward him without quite registering that they were doing it. He narrated what he was doing as he did it, and the way he talked about movement and conflict and the nature of what a human body was capable of made you feel like you were being let into something essential, something that mattered beyond the immediate context of a film set. But Hollywood had no idea what to do with him, and I watched that play out up close, and it remains one of the ugliest things I witnessed in an industry that offers no shortage of candidates for that distinction. I sat in rooms where men with real power discussed Bruce directly in front of me, without any self-consciousness, because I was furniture to them, a production assistant holding a clipboard. I heard them explain with complete and practiced confidence why American audiences would not accept an Asian lead, why the market research did not support it, why he was too intense, too specific, too much of something that did not fit cleanly inside the shape they had already decided on. I watched men look at someone with a rare and undeniable gift and explain in careful professional language exactly why that gift did not qualify. Bruce absorbed it all with a composure that I understand now, looking back, must have required an almost exhausting amount of internal discipline to maintain. But there were moments, brief and tightly controlled moments, where you could catch a glimpse of what it was actually costing him to sit in those rooms and listen to those conversations. The man who came for him on that October night understood precisely where Bruce stood in that hierarchy. He had chosen his moment with that knowledge in mind. His name was Carl DeHaven. He was 41 years old, a stunt coordinator and martial arts consultant who had been working in the industry for close to 2 decades. He had learned from genuine masters, and I want to be clear about that from the start. Carl DeHaven was not a pretender. He was skilled, experienced, and carried real respect within his particular corner of the business. He had broken bones doing his job and wore those injuries the way men of his generation wore everything difficult, like something earned, like proof of a life taken seriously. The problem was that the world he had built his reputation inside was coming to an end, and on some level he knew it. Carl's standing rested on a style of screen fighting that Bruce was quietly and methodically making obsolete. The old approach, wide, sweeping movements, choreography built around predictability, reaction shots timed to land before the strike that caused them. Bruce had already demonstrated, simply by doing what came naturally to him, that all of it looked unconvincing next to what real technique looked like in motion. And in an industry where the distance between perception and reality is the only thing that actually matters, that comparison had begun to make Carl's 20 years of experience look like a liability. They had clashed professionally on at least 2 occasions that I witnessed directly, and 3 more that I heard about through other people. Every exchange was controlled, every disagreement handled with the surface courtesy that the professional environment demanded. But underneath all of it, I recognized something I had seen before, the particular friction that builds between a man defending something he spent his life constructing and a man who simply represents what comes after it. What finally pushed things past the point of professional tension turned out to be smaller than the conflict deserved. A producer, someone I will not name because he has since passed away, made a comment during a production meeting that afternoon. The discussion was about fight sequences for an upcoming project, and he said in front of both men that he thought they should move forward with Bruce's approach rather than the traditional one. It was a business decision. It was a practical call. It was almost certainly the correct creative choice. But what Carl DeHaven heard that moment was not a production note. He heard a verdict. By the time the information reached me, traveling through the informal network that moves news around a studio faster than any official channel ever could, the challenge had already been extended. Not publicly, not in a way that could be witnessed and reported and turned into something embarrassing. Carl was far too professional for that kind of exposure. Instead, he had sent word privately through a mutual contact, a quiet and carefully worded invitation to resolve the question that everyone in certain circles had been asking in private without ever wanting to say out loud. Are you genuinely what you appear to be, or is it a performance? Bruce had accepted without pausing to consider it. I spent a long time afterward trying to find the right words for what made his eyes different from other people's eyes, and never quite got there. The closest I could come was this. Most people's eyes move. Even exceptional people, even genuinely powerful people, their eyes are always in some kind of motion, calculating, weighing, performing. Bruce's eyes were still. Completely and unusually still, like the fixed center point inside something rotating at high speed. We spoke for the first time outside stage 9.
I was carrying a stack of script revisions, and he was waiting for someone who was already 20 minutes late, which in Hollywood is generally a reliable sign that the meeting is not going to happen. Out of habit, more than anything deliberate, I offered him coffee from my thermos. He accepted without any fuss. We stood there in the California morning and talked about nothing that mattered for about 15 minutes. His daughter Shannon had just been born. He was tired in the particular way that new fathers are tired, that specific kind of exhaustion that somehow carries something luminous inside it at the same time. In the months that followed, I found reasons to be wherever Bruce was working. This was not unusual behavior. Half the young men on that lot did the same thing. When he demonstrated his techniques for the fight coordinators, people moved toward him without quite registering that they were doing it. He narrated what he was doing as he did it, and the way he talked about movement and conflict and the nature of what a human body was capable of made you feel like you were being let into something.
He was broader through the shoulders and moved with the settled confidence of a man who had spent nearly his entire adult life being the most capable person in whatever room he walked into. He wore a gray sweatshirt and dark trousers and came through that stage door without any performance attached to it, which I noted and respected regardless of everything else. He was not playing a role. He walked to the center of the stage and stopped roughly 5 meters in front of Bruce. Neither man said anything for a long stretch. Even inside the stage, you could feel the Santa Ana winds pressing softly against the outer walls, a faint tremor working through the metal structure above. 8 people stood at the edges of that space and did not breathe. Then Carl DeHaven looked at Bruce Lee with an expression I can only describe as the specific pride of a man who is fully convinced he is about to demonstrate something that needs demonstrating. "Let's find out," he said. That was all. And Bruce Lee smiled. Not a smile designed to project anything, not a challenge wearing the shape of a smile, but something quieter than either of those things, something that carried almost a trace of sadness in it. He shifted his weight forward by perhaps an inch. That inch was the last unremarkable moment of the evening. There is something that takes hold in the seconds before genuine violence that no film has ever come close to capturing, and I say that having spent my entire working life in an industry that has tried. I have watched fight sequences put together by the most accomplished coordinators in the business, shot from every angle, cut for maximum effect, and not one of them, not a single one, has ever reproduced the atmosphere that fills a room when 2 people who are genuinely capable of seriously hurting each other are about to do exactly that. The only word I have ever found for it is wait. The air inside Stage 4 that evening became physically heavy, the way the air feels in the minutes before a major storm settles over you, pressing down on your chest and shoulders. I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat. I became aware that Dennis was standing 2 feet to my left and had stopped his usual habit of shifting his weight from foot to foot. I became aware that Walt Fredericks had crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, then crossed them again. 8 people stripped down to something purely instinctive, every nerve ending pointed at a single spot in the center of the room. Bruce had not moved since that slight forward shift of weight. That was the first thing that registered as I watched from the wall. Carl had made adjustments to his posture. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have been obvious to someone not paying close attention, but I could see the subtle redistribution of weight, the quiet, professional calibration of a body that had done this many times before and already knew what was expected of it. His training was running in the background, automatic, already executing its protocols. Bruce looked like a man waiting for a bus. I mean that without any irony at all. Nothing about how he was standing communicated readiness in any conventional sense. His hands were not up. His feet were not set in any recognizable fighting stance. He stood in that amber half-dark, with his weight tilted slightly forward and his eyes on Carl, looking precisely like someone who had made a simple decision to be fully present in the moment and was prepared to let the moment come to him. Carl noticed. I watched him notice it. Something moved across his face briefly, not quite doubt, but something closer to a recalibration,
the expression of a man who had arrived expecting to read a particular set of signals and found that none of them were being offered. He had expected a stance, a visible preparation, some acknowledgement that it was beginning. Bruce gave him nothing of the kind. For just a moment, Carl was a man checking instruments he was no longer certain applied to the situation in front of him. Then he spoke. "I have nothing against you personally," Carl said. His voice was level and professional, and I believed him completely and without reservation. "This is not personal," Bruce answered quietly. "I know. And I want to be precise about that word, quiet, because quiet and soft are not the same thing. Soft suggests something uncertain behind it. This was the quiet of someone who has no need of volume to make themselves heard." Carl continued, "You have made people question things. 20 years of methods that function, methods that have kept people from getting seriously hurt on set. And you come along and make it look—" He paused and selected his next word with visible care. "Inadequate." Bruce was silent for a moment. When he responded, his voice carried something I have spent 50 years trying to put into the right category. It was not unfriendly. It was not dismissive. It was almost gentle, the way complete honesty sometimes sounds gentle because it has no investment in softening itself and no need to perform certainty. "It is inadequate," he said, "not because of anything you have done, but because of what it was built to do. It was built to appear real. That is a different thing from being real." Carl's jaw tightened, not from anger, from recognition. "Then let's find out what's real," he said. That was the second time he had used that phrase, "let's find out." I have turned those 3 words over in my mind more times than I can count across the decades since. There was something almost methodical about them, not the language of a man who wanted to cause harm, but the language of a man who had been carrying a question for a long time and had arrived at the point where he needed it answered. Gloria Chen, standing just to my right, touched my arm briefly. I looked at her. She gave a small, slow shake of her head, and I understood immediately. She was not telling me to leave. She was telling me to pay attention, to hold on to this, to be present in a way that would last beyond the evening itself. I turned back to the center of the stage. Carl had begun to move, circling slowly and with clear professional intention, the measured steps of someone who understands distance and angles and the spatial geometry of a confrontation. He was reading the space, reading Bruce the way you read a piece of unfamiliar terrain before you commit to crossing it. His eyes were doing precise work, tracking Bruce's hands, his feet, the set of his shoulders, all the small involuntary signals that trained fighters learn to interpret before they become actions. Bruce turned with him, but not mechanically, not step matching step. There was nothing reactive about it. He simply remained facing Carl and made small, almost unhurried adjustments that kept the distance between them constant and his own position centered, like a compass needle that always settles north regardless of how the compass is turned. "I trained with the best," Carl said. He was not boasting, he was establishing facts. "Kenpo, Judo, I studied under Ed Parker. I worked with people who had trained under Masa Oyama. I have been beaten by people who genuinely knew what they were doing." Bruce answered without any hesitation, "I believe you." Carl kept going. "So I am not walking into this without knowing what I am doing." Bruce agreed simply, "No, you are not." The circling continued. Carl was gradually widening his orbit, and I realized as I watched that there was a specific purpose to it. He was trying to get Bruce to commit to a fixed position, to plant himself somewhere definite so that Carl would know with certainty where he was going to be. It was intelligent movement. It was the product of decades spent studying the geometry of exactly these kinds of situations, but Bruce would not give him a fixed point to work from. He simply kept turning, effortlessly present, offering Carl nothing solid to orient himself around. Walt Fredericks leaned close to my ear. "He is not letting him set the frame," he whispered. Walt had shot more production material than almost anyone else on that lot, and understood visual language the way a musician understands sound.
He recognized the architecture of what was happening before the rest of us had assembled the pieces. I did not fully grasp what he meant until later, but I stored it away. The man from the valley, the eighth witness, whose name I did not know that evening, had uncrossed his arms. He had leaned forward, and something in his expression had shifted from the careful neutrality he had held since arriving to something more open and attentive. Whatever he was reading and what he saw, it had surprised him. Then Carl stopped circling. He stopped and looked at Bruce with the expression of a man who has finally arrived at a decision he has been building toward for a long time. There was something almost like relief in it, the relief that comes from passing the point where turning back is still an option. "I want you to know," Carl said, "that I will not hold back." Bruce answered simply, "Good." Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Neither will I." When those words landed, something shifted in that room. I felt it as a physical thing, a change in pressure, a change in temperature, a response moving through 8 bodies that understood before their minds caught up that the talking was finished. Carl DeHaven rolled his neck once, a slow and deliberate rotation, the practiced preparation of a body that had learned through long repetition how to signal itself that it was time. He raised his hands into a defensive stance, clean, correct, the posture of someone genuinely trained, front hand high, rear hand protecting the chin, weight distributed with the precision that only comes from years of deliberate work. He was good. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Standing there in the amber light of Stage 4, 41 years old and carrying 2 full decades of real experience, Carl DeHaven was a genuinely impressive thing to look at. On any other night, in any other room, against almost any other person breathing, what he brought to that stage was